In this video, I'll give you a basic rundown of all of the casters available in 14, discuss their playstyle, as well as the changes that came with the expansion. Hopefully this will help you decide which one you want to play, or just give you an overview over what they do if you don't plan on actually playing a caster. Now, without further ado, let's get started with the first job, that is Pictomancer. After trying this job extensively over the last few weeks, I can indeed confirm that Pictomancer is fun. If I had to describe what the job does in as short a time as possible, I would say that Pictomancer is a resource hoarder taken to the extreme. All your rotation is about storing resources inside of your job gauge or waiting for them to accumulate and then using them at the right time to not screw yourself over movement wise. Firstly, of course, Pictomancer can store motifs inside of their job gauge by drawing them. There are 3 different motifs: creature motifs, weapon motifs, and landscape motifs. The actual action of drawing them is a long cast that you have to stand still for, which also doesn't deal any damage. So this is some preparation that you have to do during downtime to prepare for whenever you actually need them. Afterwards, they can be rendered into reality, granting you different benefits. For example, the creature motifs will give you these little depictions. The weapon motif grants you access to 3 uses of this instant cast hammer that lets you move around freely, so this is great for movement, but also deals a lot of damage. And lastly, the landscape motif gives you and your allies a damage buff and also creates this circle on the ground inside of which Pictomancer has their recast time reduced, so they want to stand inside of it to basically cast faster. The white stacks on the job gauge have to do with the ability Holy in White, which is used for movement. And the numbered gauge is the so-called ether hue gauge, which is gained by using the basic filler GCDs. That can be used to swap to the subtractive palette, which will change the GCDs to be longer in cast time but also higher in potency. So as you can see, one way or another, everything that you're storing on the job gauge somehow has to do with movement across the arena or preparing for burst windows. A mechanic that was previously difficult can be made very trivial if you have your hammer motif ready and you can just move around freely instead of having to hardcast. By switching to the subtractive palette whenever there's no movement happening, we can also indirectly prepare for more demanding mechanics that are going to happen in the future. Another movement tool available to Pictomancer is perhaps my favorite dash in the game with Smudge. This is so snappy and responsive, and you can actually use it without losing uptime if you're doing your short casts. It's just an amazing ability. During the 2-minute burst windows, you get a free use of the subtractive palette, and ideally you'll want to play around this circle that you place on the ground as it reduces your recast time. Black Mage has a similar ability with ley lines, which is a much smaller circle. However, they have a few tricks up their sleeve. For example, they can move it across the arena, or they can dash back to it whenever it's safe again. Pictomancer has no such tool. However, their damage buff is completely separate from the circle in the first place, so not being able to stand inside of it for the full duration is less punishing than it is for Black Mage, in my opinion. As far as personal and party-wide utility goes, you obviously have the damage buff, but with Tempera Coat you also have some personal mitigation that can be extended to the entire party at reduced potency. Pictomancer does not have a revive, but it makes up for it by dealing a metric boatload more damage than Summoner and Red Mage. So after playing it for a few weeks, I have to say I really like Pictomancer, and if you haven't tried it yet, you should give it a go. Difficulty-wise, I'll give Pictomancer a 3 out of 5 stars. The next job I want to talk about is Summoner, and this one I have extensive experience on because I played it in the raids during the last expansion after the rework. Summoner inside of its rotation cycles through different demi-summons every 1 minute. These are by far your highest potency, and it's very important that you don't drift them. Between each one of these demi-summons, so again once every minute, you're going to summon Ifrit, Titan and Garuda, each of them having their own little tempo attached to them. So for example, Garuda has a few fast casts and 1 long cast, Ifrit has a forced dash as well as 2 long casts, and Titan has its instant cast 1 2-punch combo. Summoner can be a bit confusing at first because all of the actions will change on your hotbar depending on which summon you have up. But once you understand which button changes into what, the job is actually extremely straightforward. The only real decision you have to make when it comes to movement is deciding between Ifrit, Titan and Garuda, with Ifrit being the worst one for movement and Titan being the best. Whenever the demi summons up, you don't have to worry about movement at all, as every single one of your actions becomes an instant cast. So movement difficulty wise, switching from something like Black Mage or even Pictomancer to Summoner is just night and day. There are many cases where it just feels like a physical range with no cast times instead. Utility-wise, Summoner brings a lot of healing to the table that many people don't even know about, because whenever you summon Phoenix, it provides a party-wide heal to everyone. This might seem a little bit tricky to use at first, because you're never going to stall your Phoenix usage to better heal your party. However, the developers have obviously thought of that, so a lot of damage actually happens during the 1 minute window whenever Phoenix is up. In addition to that, being inside of the Phoenix phase also gives you access to an instant cast targeted heal, which you can place on yourself or another party member, which is super useful for helping out your tank. Summoner also received an additional party-wide heal that they get access to whenever they summon the Solar Bahamut. This was likely added because Summoner now casts Phoenix with its healing attached to it only half as much as they used to due to the addition of the new summon, so they had to make up for that a little bit. Being able to time the heal and having a very generous timer attached to it obviously makes this a little bit more involved and more useful than Phoenix healing in my opinion. With Radiant Aegis, Summoner has some powerful personal mitigation that just provides a barrier on themselves. And of course they have a revive, and they actually get that very early on into the game as well. Last expansion, I was always someone to be quick to defend the current state of Summoner. Many people weren't happy with it because it was very straightforward, very bare bones, because I thought they had a good framework to build upon in the next expansion. Bahamut and Phoenix were a little bit different because Phoenix has the heal, but as it stands right now, our new rotation might as well be Bahamut, 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 Phoenix. So this new demi summon doesn't actually add anything to the job. If anything, it probably makes it easier and a little bit more stale to play. The only real new damage button that actually changes the gameplay up a little bit is the follow-up to the damage buff called Searing Light, which you get to use every 2 minutes, which is kind of nice. But realistically, it's just not enough for me to stay interested in the job for another expansion. There's definitely something to be said for having an easy job that allows you to focus on mechanics, and Summoner's Toolkit will always be useful in raids as well. Difficulty wise, I think once you're used to it, Summoner is by far the easiest job in the game, and therefore it has to be a 1 out of 5 stars. Before we get to the other casters, I want to take a moment to talk about the sponsor of today's video, which is Guild Wars 2. I'm sure many of you already know this free to start MMO, which has been around for quite a while. Recently, Guild Wars 2 has switched to quarterly content releases across the span of a year, meaning there are very regular expansions released that frequently add new stuff to the game. The most recent expansion is Janthea Wilds, which is out now, and this brings the players to the Isles of Janthea in pursuit of adventure, and as it's a very perilous location, you're sure to have many opponents to fight using the new weapon, which is the Spear. This is actually the first weapon that they're adding to the game, and it's available for all professions, so this is sure to shake up the gameplay quite a bit. The expansion also brings the long-requested housing system called Homesteads. This is an account-wide personal instance that you can decorate and cultivate as much as you want. One thing I've always liked about Guild Wars 2 is the mounts, and you'll struggle to find another MMORPG that has an implementation of these that's nearly as good. The expansion will add the Warclaw mount, which is automatically unlocked for all players who own Heart of Thorns or Path of Fire. With one of the healthiest and most inclusive MMORPG communities around, as well as lots of new content being added, such as 3 new open world maps, convergences, as well as a fractal dungeon with a challenge mode, this expansion looks like a lot of fun, and I think you should check it out. Thanks to ArenaNet for sponsoring this video, and let's get on with it. The next caster I want to talk about is Red Mage. This one is well known for its melee combos as well as backflips that more often than not send them off the arena. Alternatively, some of you might also know this job as Res Mage, which is a name that it's gotten because of its ability to revive half the party in a very short amount of time. Usually, reviving other players is a very long cast that you have to stand still for, so Summoner as well as the healers tend to save their swift cast for it. Red Mage on the other hand has a trait called Dual Cast, which lets them instantly cast every other cast. So what they can do is cast a damage spell, revive, damage spell, revive, and so on. This dual cast trait is also at the core of the Red Mage playstyle because it allows you to alternate between short casts and long casts that you're instantly casting. This gives Red Mage kind of a feel of a 1-2 punch mage and allows them to freely move across the arena every other GCD. While doing this, you're trying to balance the black and white mana on your job gauge, which at first is a little bit weird, but after a while you really get used to it and it kind of just becomes second nature. If you mess this up and the mana becomes too much out of whack, you're going to lose damage, so you want to avoid that at all costs. Once you have enough mana, you're able to enter a melee phase. Not only is this the highest damage phase in the red mage rotation, but it's also whenever they can move around the most. So a big part of mastering a fight on red mage is figuring out where to place your melee combos throughout. Every 2-minute window, red mage provides a damage buff to their entire party, and they get an action called Manification, which gives them a free melee combo. What's worth noting here is that Manification doesn't have a 120-second cooldown, but a 110-second cooldown, meaning that throughout the fight, if you use it on cooldown, it's going to drift. Whether you want to use it on cooldown or inside of the damage buff comes down to the kill time of the boss, as if you can't gain another usage of Manification towards the end of the fight, you might as well save it to be used under the damage buff and deal extra damage. To get into melee range and back out of it again, red mage also has access to 2 dashes, one of them being the optional backflip that I mentioned before. In Dawntrail, red mage received a follow-up to the action Acceleration, which usually allows 1 free instant cast of another ability. The new ability is called Grand Impact, and it's also an instant cast, so that is theoretically a little bit of extra movement for red mage to tackle the fights with. The other action that was added is Vice of Thorns, which is a follow-up to their damage buff. So this will automatically be used once every 120 seconds inside of the damage windows. And the final action is also a follow-up called Prefulgence, which is used after Manification. As you can see, they seem to have really liked follow-up actions this expansion, not just for red mage, but across all jobs, because very likely they don't want to add more buttons and just increase the button bloat. Even now, I think it's one of the best designed jobs in the game. It's neither too difficult nor too easy, so it's very nice for both new players as well as more experienced ones. As far as utility goes, red mage does not have any personal mitigation such as all of the other casters. So this makes them the most fragile caster, but they are still able to provide some mitigation to their entire party through magic barrier. And they have kind of a consolation prize in the form of Vercure, which is a heal that, unlike the heal that you have on Summoner, actually heals for a decent amount of potency. However, just like with Paladin's Clemency, you'd be wise to leave the actual healing to your healers who can do this much more efficiently. Alternatively, you can also use Vercure in downtime to gain dual cast whenever the boss is untargetable, to then start off the combat again with an instant cast. To me, difficulty-wise, red mage is somewhere between 2 and 3, so let's give it a 2.5 out of 5. The last job we have to discuss is Black Mage, and here I want to preface this by saying that I am a very casual Black Mage enjoyer, and given how difficult it is to play, please, Black Mage mains, don't look too hard on your screen. I tried my best, but after not playing the job for like a year, I can only do so much. Black Mage is renowned for being the hardest caster and perhaps the hardest job in the game, due to its very difficult movement. All of this while the core rotation of the job isn't even that difficult. Black Mage continuously cycles through 2 phases, Astral Fire and Umbral Ice. Inside of Astral Fire, they will use a bunch of fire spells to deal the majority of their damage and spend all of their MP, before switching back to Umbral Ice, where they will regenerate the MP through using ice spells. Inside of Astral Fire, you'll have to use 6 fire spells due to the newly added ability Flare Star, which will give you a stack on this new gauge every time you use a fire spell that get removed whenever you switch to ice. So if for some reason you are unable to get 6 fire spells into each one of these windows, you will get absolutely screwed over and cheated out of a very high potency GCD. The main fire spell you'll be using for dealing damage inside of Astral Fire is Fire 4. And unless you use something like Triple Cast or Swift Cast, this requires you to stand completely still. So that is 6 GCDs that you have to stand still for inside of every single Astral Fire window. And that doesn't even factor in the fact that you have to weave in other abilities too, for which you'll have to sacrifice movement options. There are so many failure points with Black Mage, it's difficult to list them all. If you drop your Astral Fire, and that's a tragedy. If you accidentally use one too many Fire Force, you can't use your Despair, and that is even more tragic. If your Astral Fire is running out, you still need to cast Despair, you don't have Triple Cast or Swift Cast, and you need to move across the arena for a mechanic, That gives you complete decision paralysis. To top all of this off, Black Mage's personal damage buff is ley lines, which is a small circle on the ground that they have to stand in to gain reduced recast time. And let me tell you, Black Mages love nothing more than reduced recast time. Over the last few expansions, Black Mages have gotten a few tricks such as moving the ley lines to their current location or being able to dash back to them whenever there's no AoE inside there anymore. But a lot of these issues can be circumvented by just using ley lines at the right time and in the right place. Over the years, Black Mage has definitely gotten a lot of new movement options, but in return, the fights have also required a lot more movement throughout. So while the job is not nearly as static as it used to be, that doesn't change the fact that you have to be smart with your positioning and stingy with your movement options. That's not to discourage you from playing Black Mage, however, as I think it's just a matter of practice. If you put in enough hours and you get really good at the movement options, Black Mage has a really good damage potential. And I know a lot of players find playing Black Mage very satisfying because there is something to be said for beating a boss, of course, but there is also something to be said for beating a boss in style. When it comes to utility, Black Mage has some personal mitigation, and that's pretty much it. Unless of course you want to count dealing a lot of damage as future damage mitigation, as killing the boss faster leads to less damage dealt to the party. That and other mental gymnastics are used to justify picking the job. Difficulty wise, you might have guessed, Black Mage is a 5 out of 5 job for me, but difficulty is subjective, and with enough practice it can become quite a bit easier. So here's who I would recommend all of the different casters to. Summoner is a very simple job with very easy movement across the arena that is suited to beginner players or those who want to focus on mechanics. For example, in my opinion, it's a great job for a raid leader to play, because this way they can keep an eye on other players while they're doing their own rotation, and they can use their freed mental capacity to help out other players by calling things out. Pictomancer is a great option for those of you who want to play a slightly more selfish caster because they don't bring a res, but also don't want to deal with the hassle of playing a Black Mage. It does definitely also help that the job is pumping pretty ungodly damage numbers right now. Red Mage is a great option for people who are proccing fights because it allows you to see later mechanics. It's also fantastic in open world content such as Palace of the Dead or Eureka because of the ability to heal itself, while obviously also reviving other players that you stumble upon. At the same time, it's a bit more challenging than Summoner. Lastly, Black Mage is still the option for players who are looking for a personal challenge. Mastering the job's movement can be a very satisfying experience. And that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it, please consider also watching the one that I made on the tanks, where I go over the differences between all of those. Even if you're not looking to play one, knowing the differences is still going to be useful. For now, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.